I just want to let everyone know that you spelled in the title of Won't You Be My Neighbor, you spelled neighbor wrong. You put like a U toward the end there. And
Canadian.
It's just there's no U there in neighbor.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 32, and I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian. I'm joined in real live meat space by my co-hosts, Carolyn Pettit.
Meat.
And Ebony Astor.
I also want meat.
And now you know why I've hired these two. This is the show. Nobody knows that I love meat. That didn't make any sense.
They will.
They will.
They will.
Oh, and you know what's great about it is that someone's going to cut just that bit and use it for gross purposes.
They are. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love, or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. In today's show, we're going to talk about things that made us cry. Won't You Be My Neighbor, the new Mr. Rogers documentary, and Hannah Gadsby's Netflix special, Nanette. As always, we'll finish the show by all sharing a little something in What's Your Freak-Out. And exclusively for our fantastic drip backers, we've got a bonus segment. It'll be something, and I'm sure it'll be great. Tune in. What is Drip, you ask? Well, it is a subscription-based membership platform, and your generous support is what helps us keep making this very podcast. If you want access to special perks and exclusive backer rewards, join our podcast community at d.rip/femfreak. Now on with the show.
So, Anita, first thing I want to tell our listeners is in the script for this episode, which you put together, I just want to let everyone know that you spelled in the title of Won't You Be My Neighbor, you spelled neighbor wrong. You put like a U toward the end there, and
Canadian.
there's no U there in neighbor.
You know,
there's no you in neighbor.
There's no U in neighbor. Yeah,
a motto I've lived by.
Yeah,
wow.
Won't you be my neighbor, but not you?
Yeah.
What can I say? We've never kicked the British out of Canada.
Get on it. Get on it. I mean, I know y'all don't like to be rude or pushy or whatever, but I think it's time.
Yeah, it might be time. It might be time.
Yeah.
It's I've lived in the U.S. long enough that I still add U's to my like color,
flavor,
but I also sometimes don't, so it's very inconsistent when I'm writing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm Canadian. All right. What's the pop culture news this week?
Well, let's see. First of all, there was I don't know if you call it a campaign or what, but there was a group announced basically that they totally basically almost have the $200 million that they need to remake The Last Jedi, and they're totally going to do this thing. They're going to remake The Last Jedi.
So, wait. Where did this money come from?
Good question.
No, I don't actually know. Do you know? Investors? People?
Whatever. Are they serious?
Well,
they've said in their minds, they're serious.
Yeah.
You know? My understanding is that they had a site and they said, essentially posed the question to their, chucklehead followers, would you pledge money? They didn't actually receive any money, but would you pledge money for the remake of this film? And if so, how much would you pledge? Oh. You could put in any amount. I offer 4 million quatlus.
Yeah.
So would you like to explain why they want to remake it?
I would. So on their site, they posted with what they think the problem is with modern day Star Wars, right? So the fans are completely divided, and the core goal of Star Wars has been abandoned. The goal is not to make one half of the fandom happy over the other. It is to make a film that the fandom in general as a whole enjoys.
Wow.
And you know why these films are not making everyone happy? The hero archetypes of the original films is what made these so great. It made characters that everyone could relate to regardless of their background and beliefs. No longer having this core element, along with poor storytelling, has made the franchise divisive and in disarray. So, I mean, really, it's obvious, and of course they're right. Like, the earlier Star Wars films featured white men that everyone could relate to.
Everyone.
Now we've got women and black guys and stuff, and it's like, we can't relate. Not everyone can relate to those, but we can all relate to white men.
Yeah.
Just keep putting white men at the center. It's that simple. Oh, yes.
I love how these dudes tell on themselves, because, as you and I were having this conversation, like, one of their complaints about The Force Awakens was that it's essentially a retelling of A New Hope, right? With Rey as a version of Luke Skywalker. Like, it's almost exactly the same, right? So it's like, so what you're saying is Rey goes through exactly the same hero's journey as your, God Emperor Luke Skywalker. Sorry, mixing up my Star Trek or my science fiction properties there. But so she's exactly the same, but because she's not a white man, it doesn't count.
It's not believable that she has all these powers. Like, it's just,
It's totally believable when he has them, but
exactly.
it's not because she is a lady
And one of my
person.
favorite things about all of this is that Rian Johnson, the director of the real The Last Jedi, tweeted, quote tweeted their tweet, and his tweet was just like, please, 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 please let this happen. Please make this happen. Please, please, please. Because
so
we
good.
all know that anything that comes out of this, which is probably going to be nothing, but if they actually do produce anything, it's going to be spectacular.
Yeah.
So I, not to harp on this too much, but I think that, like, so we talk a lot about fan culture. Obviously, we are a pop culture podcast, but I think there's some really interesting things that fans do to rewrite narratives that they don't agree with. So, for example, Battlestar Galactica, pretty universally, everybody hated the last season of it. And so some fans got together and made Battlestar Redactica, where they re-edited the whole last season to tell a different story. Like, I think that stuff is really interesting and fun. In ways that can bring communities together and bring fandoms together. This isn't that, though. This is very much a attempt to maintain the, like you were saying earlier, the status quo of like white men at the top of the echelon, always being the heroes. And so I just want to kind of offer that, like, there are alternatives to being upset with or not liking the way a particular a franchise has gone, and being able to do something fun for your community. This is just like, fuck you, go back to the status quo, like in a way that I think is really toxic.
Right.
I also love the idea that to them it seems totally natural that that Disney is going to allow them access to this property. The Last Jedi has made over $1 billion. Disney is quite happy with the performance of that film. So I think it's y'all who are unhappy, but I don't know. I mean, it seemed like it did pretty well, you guys. I think there's some people who liked it.
Just a couple.
My other pop culture news story, and this is like a weird collision of politics and fashion and pop culture, if you can even, but it just was such a story that broke across lines of all kinds of journalism, was Melania Trump wearing a jacket that said, I don't really care, do you? When she was going to visit one of our child internment camps. And I mean, I honestly think, though, here's my thing is fuck Melania. She's complicit in all of this. I'm not one of those free Melania people. No, fuck that. But I do, my actual interpretation of that is that she did it to embarrass Trump. And because there is some kind of expression of frustration with him.
I think that's really generous.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe. I mean,
I had not thought of it that way. I will say that for whatever reason she did it, whether it was as a, fuck you, to her odious toad husband, or as I suspect, just, declaration that, she doesn't give a shit about, brown children. The fact that people who still want to suggest that it was not deliberate just seem to be so willfully disingenuous. This is a woman who has never, wiped her ass on anything less than Balenciaga toilet paper. I can't think of a set of public figures whose public image has to be more crafted than the president and first lady of the United States. Every single thing that goes on their body has been discussed and vetted. And I mean, yeah, you may hate the length of Trump's ties, but that is a deliberate choice that is made. You know, like he doesn't just grab one. And the length of her dresses is something that's talked about. So the fact that she would just grab like a $39 H&M jacket that just happened to be there and no one had a comment on it,
Zara,
no, that's deliberate.
Zara, get your cheap clothing franchises straight.
I mean, that is Anita weighing in to let us know that is Zara, Zara. If you want to purchase, there'll be a link in the show description.
I mean, I think she has less of the kind of staff that prior first ladies have had and I think it's just because she doesn't like people telling her, wear this in this situation, wear this in this situation. And so... I mean, I think that like George Lucas making the Star Wars prequel trilogy, there's just nobody in that White House who's going to say to Melania, like, I don't know if that's a real smart choice, which, you know, political figures like presidents and first ladies need that person so that they don't go out and make huge faux pas, but... Nonetheless, this is where we are.
I guess I'm just saying that, like, she's not someone who, like, this is not Michelle Obama wearing J. Crew, right? Like, she's never worn stuff like this before. She's not known for wearing, like, fast fashion.
Right.
In fact, her entire, you know, affect is the exact opposite of that. So to think that, like, oh, I just got a little chilly, I'll grab my Zara jacket that I just happen to have, like, no, this is a choice. Like, we have never seen you in something like this before.
No, it was not a thoughtless choice, that's for sure.
Well, now I'm thinking about children in internment camps, so that's cool.
Wow.
Which I'm glad you did bring up because it's been
so.
I'm glad you brought it up because that's been a really horrifying thing that we've
our nation is committing human
rights. I've been watching The Handmaid's Tale, so basically it's just we're there. We're almost there.
I know.
All right, let's shift gears real hard into the mains for this week.
Well, yeah. I mean, so we're going to talk about the Fred Rogers documentary. I think a lot of people are saying that this film is particularly resonant right now because it functions as a kind of a call for radical kindness and for particularly, obviously, because his life's work was devoted to children. You know, obviously there's particularly that element to it. And so I think there is that tension, right, between sort of what our country is doing right now, these acts that are they're unquestionably going to leave whatever the future holds for these children. This is going to leave like permanent emotional scars, right, on them. And I think that the Fred Rogers documentary, and of course Fred Rogers himself, was so cognizant of course the emotional needs of children, right? And so I just think that like we're terrorizing, we're psychologically and emotionally terrorizing children. And here we're talking about a film about a man who understood our individual and cultural failure, I think, to provide children with the care and the upbringing and, you know, that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. We are talking about Won't You Be My Neighbor, the documentary about Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, by Morgan Neville, who's known for 20 Feet from Stardom and also my favorite, Ugly Delicious. And based on, just to riff off of what you were saying, there is I think he was a journalist in the documentary that said something about, I don't know if Mr. Rogers succeeded. And I think that that's really in relation to what you're saying about compassion and growing, you know, raising children with a full range of emotions, with like engagement, like healthy, honest engagement. And he was like, I don't know if he actually succeeded.
Well, I think that Fred and the film, I think, is good about putting this in the larger cultural context of the eras through which the show existed, because, you know, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was on the air producing new episodes for decades. I honestly
didn't know that it was on for as long as it was.
Yeah. And you know, it talks about how, I mean, we see ads selling guns and stuff to children.
That fucking ad where they throw the gun out of the window, out of the television screen.
Yeah, the soldier is like, here, try it, kid. And it's like an M16, a toy M16, but like it literally says like M16 on it. Right. And so, I mean, it's obviously, I think Fred Rogers did far more than we can expect of any individual, and I think his influence was tremendous. It's just that when you put that in the context of a larger capitalist system that preys on children, that trains them to be consumers, that disrespects their emotional inner lives, and so much children's entertainment is so worthless. It's so much just like, whether it was pratfalls and throwing pies in people's faces, originally when Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was getting started, to like giant robots shooting at each other to sell toys, whatever. It's not like valuable. It doesn't have substance, but it sure makes a ton of money and it sells a ton of products.
What was y'all's relationship to Mr. Rogers?
This will surprise absolutely no one. Was a pretty salty, snarky kid from about age 3 months. So I remember not watching Mr. Rogers because to me, it was too slow. It was too soft. It had no edge. And I absolutely fell into the trap of needing, more bright lights, more noise, more action, more, like constant, jokes and pratfalls, et cetera, in my children's TV when I was younger. So I felt I was too cool for Mr. Rogers as a kid. As I got older and in junior high and high school, I started to watch Mr. Rogers. That was that age. So say like around age, 13, 14 was the onset of like the severe depression and anxiety in my life. And Mr. Rogers, if I get through this podcast without crying one time, it will be a fucking miracle. Between this and Nanette, oh my God, I was a wreck this entire weekend. But Mr. Rogers, at that point, I was so glad that there was a person out there who was interested in listening to young people, who, like, the slow pace was deliberate because he leaves space for responses, right? He's not fabricating a conversation and assuming he knows what you're going to say. He's actually interested in listening. But just like his caring and his love, I needed to know that there were people like that in the world. And so, it's weird that I was too cool for him as a 3-year-old and 4-year-old. Like I was shitty even then, but then as a 15-year-old, like I loved watching Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, for me, my childhood household was, there was a lot of upheaval, noise, conflict, violence, and, my father was the source of a lot of that upheaval and conflict and violence, and so I was really drawn to Mr. Rogers' show, The Neighborhood, the make-believe world that he created. All of it was very much like this like peaceful refuge, in the midst of like my very chaotic childhood, and provided like some model for stable, loving, compassionate, like adulthood that was entirely absent in like my actual day-to-day life. And so, yeah, I really loved Mr. Rogers as a kid.
How striking is it and how sad that there's a section in the film where they talk about the version of adulthood and manhood that Mr. Rogers represents was so foreign to people that their only way of understanding it was to assume that his softness, his, loving kindness meant that he was a gay man, right? Like there had to be, you can't be a straight man in this culture, and not be consumed with like, violence or, or strength, like physical strength in some way. Like that was the only way that people could understand it, and just the fact that that question even had to be asked was so ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about his brand of his way of being a man is so radical. I mean, really, I think that it makes people, at a certain point, it makes people deeply uncomfortable because it's intrinsically challenging to everything our culture says about what it means to be a man. So in that way, I think he's heroic.
Yeah. And so it was very interesting to have, Postman Francois Clemens, an out and proud gay man say like, listen, here's my experience working with Fred Rogers over the years and, my coming out and et cetera, and blah, blah, blah. But like, no, he was not gay. It's ridiculous that you're asking this question, but yeah, I would have known.
I wonder how, I was thinking the same thing too about the modes of masculinity that this brings up. But I was also thinking about how so Clemens said that he could not come out because he had to represent all black folks and you couldn't have a gay black man. And that Fred actually said to him, you can't be on the show if you come out. And I'm glad they included that, but I kind of I feel like that's a big thing. The homophobia inherent in that and inherent that, they could be welcoming and push boundaries when it comes to race, but they couldn't push boundaries when it comes to sexuality.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is deeply unfortunate. I do think that Fred Rogers grew on that issue later in his life, and there's
as you hope all people can come around.
Yeah. And I do think that there's, I think that we absolutely need people like Fred Rogers and that kind of ideology. He's so focused on the individual, the needs of the individual child, right? And that is so important. I did feel like, because they ask his widow, I think, and other people, sort of the question of, well, what would he think about what's happening now, or what would he do? And, his widow, I think, said something about that he would probably try to
mend the split.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, I do think that at a certain, there are limits to the applicability of the Fred Rogers ethos, right? And of course, at a moment like this in history, it calls for powerful resistance. It doesn't call for mending the divide, right? It calls on us to say us as people of color, as queer people, as trans people, to assert our humanity and to fight back vehemently, vigorously against the system. But that's not to say that just because I don't think it's applicable to this kind of this issue, which is one of systems and society, that's not to diminish in any way the power and necessity of that philosophy and approach to caring for children and to loving children.
Something that surprised me was that there was criticism towards Mr. Rogers.
I was ready to fight.
From Fox News?
Yeah, where I missed all of that. Yeah. And so having these journalists, having these news anchors and whatever saying that he is inherently responsible for the feelings of kids growing up and feeling entitled and feeling special, and that kids shouldn't feel special unless they do something special. And I was just my jaw was I was like, what the hell are you talking about?
And it's
bonkers.
It is, and it's also what it made me realize is how members of the far right, aspects of the far right, will at times, of course, be the first to dismiss any concerns about, well, I don't know, about media impact, but then they also were like, this, TV show for kids, it completely destroyed our civilization, basically. I did really appreciate, too, of course, Fred Rogers saying toward the beginning of the special, the way it's edited, that, what we see on the screen becomes part of who we are. He says that very clearly, that, media images, what we consume, what we take in, what we're told has an impact on who we are.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Fox News thing was ludicrous.
I honestly thought that was a setup to a joke, like a further parody of responses to Mr. Rogers, like, Saturday Night Live or, some of the various other parodies of him. I could not believe, listen, there are probably only two white men that I would fight about, and that would be Mr. Rogers and Jim Henson. Say some shit about either of those two cats, and it's going to be on and popping. I like the idea that Mr. Rogers might be responsible for what is termed the narcissism of our modern age, because he had the unmitigated gall to tell children that you are fine. And you are not just fine, but I love you just the way you are. You don't have to do something sensational for me to love you. That this might possibly be a problem. What kind of morally bankrupt human suggests that that's a problem?
Yeah.
What the
Our
fuck?
president,
And I
the
did
whole administration.
Yeah.
I did appreciate that the film gave me a sense that, obviously, okay, yes, Fred Rogers is a very gentle man. And yet, you do get the sense that people, systems, media that disrespect the inner lives of children or that do harm to children, like if there's one thing that makes him mad, like that shit makes him mad. And I mean, obviously he doesn't, it's not like he goes into a rage, but you can tell that to him is so reprehensible.
I think that the film itself was so. I like Morgan Neville's work.
Sure.
Of what I've seen. When it started, I was like, oh, this is not as good as I thought it would be. And so I think the first quarter of it was a little rough in getting started, and then it gets really into it and it paces a lot better. And I was just thinking about how incredibly difficult is it to include all of the things that you want to include about this person. Like, imagine the amount of things that got cut out.
Right.
And I thought that there was a lot in this that probably could have been finessed or gone into more detail and dropped some certain things in it. And so I can't even imagine taking on the feat of telling this story. I thought I was going to be a lot more emotional watching it, and I wasn't as much. The one part that really got to me, where I was straight up crying, was during the Congress testimony, where they were fighting for $20 million to save PBS, and they set that story up perfectly, where the congressman was just over it and didn't want anyone to read anymore and didn't want any blah 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 blah, and then Mr. Rogers comes on, or Fred Rogers comes on, and he's like, can I just sing you a song? And I'm just weeping. And then the congressman being like, okay, yeah, you got your money. Just instantly, you're just like, holy shit, what a powerful human being. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be in his presence and feel that sincerity and that genuineness, and that scene killed me.
Yeah.
And there's a line at the end where he says, it's later in his life when he's really fighting for what is wrong with all of you people? Why are you making such horrible media for kids? He says, what we really need to teach our kids that what's essential in life is invisible to the eye. And that has sort of stuck with me since I've watched it, in terms of, I know it's money doesn't buy you happiness and you don't need things, but just the way it was phrased, and the based on the work that we do as well, and
and for Fred Rogers, this is not an empty platitude. I mean, this is the how he lived his life, right? So it's one of those things that, again, in the midst of our extremely materialistic, extremely capitalistic society, it's easy to dismiss those as naive, but they're not wrong. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. It's just so difficult for us to incorporate that into our lives when our culture is designed to prioritize everything else.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So I didn't mean for this week to be as heavy as it was. This was not our initial plan, but I had kept seeing people talking about Hannah Gadsby's Netflix special, Nanette. And I saw it on Twitter, in our Discord, I saw it all over the place. And so I was like, why don't we watch this thing and see what's up? Like, let's talk about that this week. And so it was like, this week is just the biggest sob fest of things that we are trying to talk about.
But I think these two films are really complementary in a lot of ways because I think they both, Hannah Gadsby talks about her youth, her adolescence. At one point she says explicitly that if a child grows up like wallowing in shame, it affects their ability to form emotional connections. And that hit me so hard because it's so, I did grow up feeling shame for all kinds of things, and it's so easy for me still as an adult. I mean, I'm aware of it now, and it's something that I'm trying to like become better about, but I'm so aware of how easy it is for me to retreat to a place of shame if like I fuck something up, if I make a mistake, whatever. It's so easy for me to be like, well, of course you did, you're such a fuck up, like you're worthless, et cetera, and so I really felt a lot of parallels or a lot of callbacks actually between these two works.
Yeah. So just context for listeners.
Yeah.
So this is a comedy, a quote unquote comedy Netflix special by an Australian comedian and writer who I hadn't heard of, and I think a lot of people. She's been around for a while. I'm not like comedy expert or anything, but I think that this really put her on the map on a much more international scale or on a higher level. And I'm really pleased with how many specials are coming out that are really doing things differently and doing comedy differently. They're integrating different types of storytelling and different kinds of media and ways of doing these things. And it's not just like punchline. And the reason that people are so enthralled with this special is, I think, two big reasons. One, she uses it to say that she's going to quit comedy, and she talks about why she's going to quit comedy and about how comedy doesn't let you fully as an outlet, as an artistic outlet for talking about the world and talking about your internal experiences, doesn't let you actually heal. And then let's not spoil. Let's see how this conversation goes, because I don't want to totally spoil, but there's like a big thing that happens at the end that I think I was fucking sobbing when that happened. And she's revealing these things about her life and connecting. It's really deep.
Yeah.
I don't know how to articulate it without saying it, but it's also so smart and funny too at the same time as being like absolutely gut-wrenching.
I watched this in two parts because I had never heard of Hannah Gadsby before and didn't know her work or her style of comedies. So all I knew was what I'd read and about how this kind of upended the stand-up comedy special and offered a kind of, new understanding of what it could do. But nevertheless, the commentary about it talked about it as a stand-up comedy special. So I went in expecting, that model. Even though I read that it upended that model, I still went in expecting, more laughs and the rhythm of a comedy special and, set up, payoff, punchline, etc., right? Which is not really what you get in this piece. And so I had to turn it off like 10, 15 minutes in the first time I watched it so that I could reset my expectation, because I wanted to actually listen to what she was saying without kind of anticipating for her where the punchlines were going to be, right? And so as she, as I watched it, like started again and watched it for the second time and really took in what she was saying, especially about when she talks about like the mechanics of jokes and storytelling and how, with a joke, all it needs is a beginning and a middle, versus a story which needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. And about how when you're a comedian in front of an audience, your job is to create a moment of tension and then diffuse that tension, and, she makes a joke about it being an abusive relationship. But then brilliantly loops it back to, what am I doing by creating and feeding like watering the soil of this relationship with this tension and this trauma over and over again. She says, it's literally making me sick. It's making me sick. So that's when I broke down. Oh my God.
Yeah.
This weekend, I'm telling you, I have no tears left, except I do. I'm not kidding. If I don't break down before the end of this show, it will be a minor miracle. Because when she says, I'm not going to do comedy anymore. Well, first she says, I've built my career on self-deprecation. And for someone from a marginalized community to do that, that's not humility. That's humiliation. It's begging for permission to speak by tearing yourself down first. And I will not do that anymore. That was a wrap for old Ebbs. You know how hard it is for me to process real human emotion. I was glad I was watching this by myself because I was donezo. I was done.
I mean, so for me as a queer person, I appreciated how. So first of all, toward the beginning, she talks about being uncomfortable with small towns, and I was like, okay, yes, my reasons for being uncomfortable in small towns are different, but I'm also like, I think a lot about how now that I've transitioned. When I was a kid, my family, we would sometimes go on road trips across the country. We'd stop in like small towns in Arizona and Texas and all over the place, little roadside motels. And I feel like, as an adult, I would not feel safe doing that. There's like all these places that I cannot go back to, or that I'd be very reluctant to go back to, that I enjoyed freely when I was a kid. But I also appreciate it because I feel very much this way as well. She spends a little time early on talking about, I think when she's sort of trying to figure out what it means to be queer and like what her queer identity is, and she watches like Mardi Gras and like these kinds of like parties and celebrations and like dances, and everything's very colorful and loud and everything, and and she's like, okay, but where are the, oh look, there's my people, but like she doesn't really feel like that, and she's like, where are the quiet queer people, right? And I mean, like I was cracking up, because I'm like, sometimes when queer people talk about like, finding their queer community, like at this dance club or at this, whatever, like this kind of, it just doesn't resonate with me because I feel invisible and uncomfortable in those spaces, right? So I'm still sort of asking, like, where is my queer, like, community? So it was so kind of validating and pleasant to hear. Like, I know that there are other queer people out there who sort of look at, at stereotypical, stereotypical examples of like queer expression and just don't feel like, like that's great, but that's just not really my scene, So thank you, Hannah Gadsby, for like giving voice to like that queer
to the quiet
experience.
gaze.
Yeah. It was particularly wonderful to watch it this weekend because this was Pride weekend in San Francisco. And I'm staying with a friend, and we had talked about going down to the parade, and both of us were like, God, we hate people, but let's go. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to go get my Buy Pride sticker, and then I'm bouncing. I'm not staying for this whole thing. But yeah, it was particularly funny to hear her talk about that while there's a revelry going by on the street, right?
Yeah.
But also the kind of like, generational laughter of it, because if you go to these events, not everyone, but so many people are very young, right? Because this is kind of the ramp up into their understanding of queer identity. And it's a place where they can connect with many other different kinds of queer people. And once they've made that connection, kind of decide, where they want to exist and what kind of world they want to inhabit. But like old queer folks are like, I'm tired, like I have to work tomorrow. I am not going out.
It was so nice out this weekend. And I was like, I did Pride so much when I was younger. I can't. Me too.
So I cheated and I made my friend get me some swag, and then I was like, but I did not go.
So one of the things I obviously loved the discussions around trauma and around like being really honest about this, and like her like there's a line where she's like, I'm not helping you learn anymore. about using comedy to there's all this stuff that I really love, and what I wasn't expecting was all the art history stuff.
Oh,
yes.
She has a whole, like, a good chunk of this is pulling from the fact that she got an art history degree. And, like, man, I got lots of feelings about art school and shitty dudes in art school and fucking painting naked women all the time and all of this crap, right? So I was just here. I was like, between crying, I'm like, yeah, you go, yeah. So, like, there's all this stuff in here that she somehow pulls it all together. I love, good storytellers are amazing. Yes. My favorite thing, though, was that she's talking about, she's like talking about how, like, ladies have existed for a very long time, apparently longer than clothing. Like, just talking about how there's all, like, men get to be regal and women are just naked all the time in these older paintings. And she goes into the stories about the men who are revered in our society who are horrible human beings, right? But there's this one line where she's like, the whole history of what did you say? The whole history, all of art history comes down to men painting flesh vases for their dick flowers.
Yes.
And I was like, I rewound it like 3 times. I was like, wait, what? This is amazing. And so just her ability to weave in this, like, historical take of how we view men and how we, how the reality of men gets rewritten in history and changed and revered, and how that is tied to her experience of being, quote unquote, incorrectly female, right? Of the patriarchy determining how women should be, how men should be, what that looks like, how power is used to coerce and corral into very rigid expectations. I was just, man, this special blew me away.
It was so good. And, like, I won't spoil the story because it's so good, but when she tears this, viewer a new asshole talking about Vincent van Gogh and, like, really breaks down what went on with Vincent van Gogh. It was so masterful. And I was like, Hannah, can you just come do our derailment episode that's going to be coming up for the Freak Show? Because she laid it out so masterfully. But the thing that I appreciated the most is the way she exposes the lie of struggling needing to be a requirement for creative genius, and the idea that we would demand pain from someone else so we can consume the artistic output that comes from that. I just loved how she was like, fuck you, and everyone else who would want someone to be unwell so that they can make a better movie for you to watch on a Friday night. Just fuck you.
Yeah. I also really appreciated how she says at one point, for straight white men, it's like the first time in history when you are experiencing what it's like to be a subcategory of human. And I don't know that we're there yet, but I think
she's just saying you are a category of human. Like, you are no longer just human.
Well, that's what
you now have a designation.
Yeah, like you're no longer like just normal default human, right? You are, and I don't know that we're there yet, but I think we need to frame conversations that way to move things forward. And I think it's such an indicator of what a moment we're at culturally with these conversations that she can even kind of come out on stage and say those things. It's encouraging to me in some ways that I don't think conversations about identity were nearly as much in the public eye, 10 years ago as they are now. And it's always encouraging to me to see that stuff being talked about in a venue where so many people are going to be exposed to it.
So highly, highly recommend checking out Hannah Gadsby's Nanette on Netflix. All right, before we move on to what's your dealy freak out deal, freak deal, freak deal, freak.
Wonderful. I hope you put some scratches behind that because Anita just broke it down.
So a friend of mine, I was texting with a friend about...
Humble brag.
You can't even not laugh at that.
I know.
I was texting with a friend and we were talking about some guy who was being an idiot, and she said, what's his deal? And then she was like, You know what? That is my problem with What's Your Deal is the only time it's used in my orbit is when it's a negative thing. Like, what the fuck is your deal? Like, what's his deal? What's her deal? Like, what the hell's going on? And I thought that was really interesting. And then I noticed that that's the only time I hear it used in the world as well. So not to say we can't use What's Your Deal. I just thought that was a little interesting insight.
Okay. I don't know. I don't find that when people talk about freaking out about something, it's usually... I mean, I don't hear it being used in too much of a positive way. I mean, it can be.
I think both of these names are stupid, just for the record. But
I don't. I still am strongly in support of what's your deal?
Maybe we can reclaim What's Your Deal.
I ain't got the time nor the energy.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. It is the week that this episode airs is also the week of Summer Games Done Quick 2018. It is a charity week-long speedrunning video game marathon, which you can watch live as it's happening at gamesdonequick.com. I sort of recommend watching it there over going to the Twitch page because you won't see the chat if you just go to gamesdonequick.com, which makes for a better experience. And yeah, like, so, you know, every year, every summer this happens, they raise money for Doctors Without Borders. And it's just a nonstop display of fascinating ways to play games really fast, sometimes to exploit glitches and bugs and things to kind of break games to get through them fast. If you want a recommendation for a particular highlight to check out on Saturday, you'll have to go to gamesdonequick.com and click the schedule link to see exactly when for your time zone. But on Saturday, there's going to be Super Mario Maker blind races, which means that it's going to be teams of players competing at levels that they've never seen before. And the levels are so diabolical every time they do this. The levels that they are up against are just so full of traps and you know, sort of things that mislead the player and everything. It's so funny and entertaining and spectacular. So check that out if you get a chance. Yeah. So gamesdonequick.com.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Ebony.
I am rewatching Elementary. Started like a week or two ago, rewatching it from the beginning. I've been doing that with a couple of shows, and you know, part of it is I'm one of those people, I think like a lot of people, who sometimes just need like oral wallpaper when I'm doing work on something, but I'm actually rewatching, like I'm engaging with it, and I'm trying to be deliberate with my watching. And the more I rewatch it, the more I enjoy it, the more I retroactively am disliking Sherlock. I'm probably just lost us 90% of our audience.
I've talked extensively about how I think Sherlock is
but they're going to blame me.
And Elementary is better.
Yeah, first of all, Johnny Lee Miller, and this is nothing against Benedict Cumberbatch, who I do think is a fine actor, and love Martin Freeman, love everybody, you know, involved in that show. But this version of Sherlock, I just think they have done something so interesting and so new, and so brave in a way. So yeah, there's a part of it that is just, you know, basic CBS crime procedural. It can be, and you know, when you're putting out 22 episodes of something a season, not every episode is gonna, you know, blow the socks off anybody. In fact, that's part of why these things last as long as they do, is because, you know, it's the equivalent of comfort food, right? So you don't want to have your brain opened up with a tin can opener every week. Sometimes you just want to sit back and enjoy something. So the crimes themselves, rarely that interesting, but the characters in the show and the growth they experience, and sometimes what's most important for me, the regression that they experience over the course of a season, I just think is so emotionally mature in a way that I don't think the show often gets credit for. So Sherlock, is played by Johnny Lee Miller, is an addict. He is in recovery and he relapses during the course of the show. And the show doesn't pull any punches about showing like the kind of devastating effects that it is wreaked upon his life, but also the people who care about him. And also, I don't think the show makes any apologies for him, nor does it try to make him seem like a kind of sexy sociopath in the way that Sherlock does. So like Johnny Lee Miller's Sherlock Holmes, like he can be rude, he can be an asshole, he is, but he also grows, and when he gets called on his shit, there's no like kind of defensiveness or easy answering. Like you can see him taking that shit on board. I don't know. I just feel like I can't believe this show's like, I don't know.
I feel like this could be a good bonus because I feel the same way, and I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. Like I've been preaching this for a while because not to take up your freak out time, but I totally agree.
Yeah, so the reason why this is my freak out, like I said, I've just been rewatching it. I also recently rewatched all of Arrested Development, which was a show I loved when it was first out, and I still think is amazingly clever, although obviously seasons 4 and 5 are not nearly to the standard of the first 3. But I found it hard to rewatch Arrested Development. So, okay, if I just lost 90% of our listeners with the whole Sherlock thing, I just lost the last 10 by saying, or what I'm about to say now, which is that as I'm rewatching it, I'm like, is it really just gay jokes? It's so much of it is just like, ha ha ha, this person is actually gay, but they're not acknowledging it. Ha ha ha, this person, is gay or effeminate and not acknowledging whatever. Like, yes, the show, like the writing is incredibly fast and funny and furious. But when you really sit down and watch it, so much of it is gay jokes. And I was like, I've moved a little bit past this.
So I watched it years ago. I don't remember it. I don't remember how I felt about it. I don't anything. And it comes up all the time. Arrested Development comes up all the fucking time still. And I'm always like, like I don't know what to say because I'm like, in my knowledge of pop culture and like having liked things and then watching them again now, I'm like, it's probably kind of fucked up. Like, but I haven't bothered to go back and watch it, so I can't have that conversation. So this is very affirming to me that my assumption that there's probably a bunch of oppressive shit in it is accurate.
Yeah, like, I whatever. I don't hit me up on Twitter, light my mentions on fire. I don't give a shit. Whatever. Elementary, thumbs up. Arrested Development gets a big eyebrow raise from me.
All right, my freak out this week is Cameron Esposito's rape jokes. Cameron Esposito is a queer comedian. Not that I need to add that to it, but that is she's great. Whatever. She's very funny. She has a special called Rape Jokes. It's available on her website at CameronEsposito.com. You can watch it for free, or if you donate, all the proceeds benefit RAIN, which is a anti-sexual violence organization in the U.S. So I watched this literally the same day that I watched Hannah Gadsby's Nanette.
Jesus.
It was a lot, but I was also just like, man, this shit's giving me life. Like both of them. Cameron's style is obviously different. She has her own storytelling and comedy style, but it is, as the name suggests, it is commenting on the fact that male comedians have used rape as a joke and as a punchline over and over and over again. And when women started being like, hey, don't do that, they lost their shit. So that's the part of what I think is the reference to the title, but she does talk about assault, and she does talk about like being a woman in the space, and it's really, really smart and really funny, and I'm so delighted that we're getting all of this comedy that is talking about real shit, right? And like, not that comedy didn't, but that we're getting these alternative voices and these alternative perspectives that are really great storytellers that are able to bring a real seriousness to their work in a way that I think a lot of audiences are craving and can identify with. The thing I keep thinking about is because I know, I know several comedians, and the way that you get to a special... Shut up, Ebony. She just mouthed humble brag to me while she's wearing a hoodie, like tied as tightly as possible around her face.
I was trying to hold the tears in. I was trying to hold the tears in when we were talking about Mr. Rogers.
But the thing is that to get to the point of doing a special, you have to perform it a lot, and you have to workshop your jokes, and you have to do them in front of audiences, and you just... So as I was watching both Hannah Gadsby's and Cameron Esposito's, I was like, how many times do you have to tell these stories? How many times do you have to do that? Like, how long did it take you to finesse this joke and this story perfectly to get it to where it is? And like, you are reliving that trauma, and you're reliving this again and again and again. And to come out as a sexual assault survivor, to tell your story of what happened that many fucking times. Like, I just, not that you should be thinking about that while you're watching the special, but I couldn't help but think about that. And especially as someone, different context, but that has to relive my like very public online harassment trauma again and again and again for like the entertainment of the public. Like, I just was like, lots of respect to them in terms of doing that, and hopefully they can find. Hopefully this is what's the word I'm looking for? A way to heal from the trauma, as opposed to it just being re-traumatizing again and again. Cool. So that's our show. This was kind of an intense show. You can catch us back here every single Wednesday. Remember that you too can join our podcast community and help us bring Feminist Frequency Radio to you every single week at d.rip/femfreak. If you are enjoying the show, you know what's really, really helpful is if you leave us a review on iTunes and give us a rating. Maybe like the 5 stars. Maybe the 4 stars. 4 or 5 stars. We'll accept those. That would be great. And please tell your friends. Help spread the word about what we're doing, especially when you're sitting at a comedy show, because comedians love it when you talk in the audience. You can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, and you can follow us on Twitter at FemFreak to stay up to date on all of our news. You can also find us individually. I am at Anita Sarkeesian. Carolyn?
I'm at Carolyn Michelle.
Ebony, where are you this week?
I am at Zara Jacket.
All right. Or Ebony asked her if you want to give her shit about Arrested Development.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.